Welcome to Beer Stories for Private Equity. Join us for our weekly happy hour, tapping into 27 years of PE experience, one pint at a time. Beer Stories for Private Equity is powered by MonogramGroup.
On today's show, we're excited to be joined by John Bova, independent operating partner based in Connecticut.
And for MonogramGroup, here's your host, Scott Markman.
Please fasten your seatbelts.
Welcome to the latest episode of Beer Stories for Private Equity. I'm Scott Markman, your host, and joining me today is John Bova. Now, what's unique about today's episode is John and I are both at ACG M&A East in Philadelphia, and we're here for a couple of days with a lot of networking and the usual goings-on in the world of private equity. And so we decided to meet here and to record the podcast. So really neat opportunity. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Scott. I'm really glad we've been able to do this. We've been chatting for months about it. And look, I think you ought to take this on the road into the M&A community and food chain. Why not go where the animals live?
Your words, not mine. I digress. Anyway, we have lots to talk about. John, if you don't mind, share with our listeners just a brief summary of your career and the kind of roles and responsibilities that you take on today and as the kind of the foundation for our overlap.
What I do today, I'm an independent operating partner. I focus and specialize in working with middle market PE firms, their portfolio companies, usually meeting with the PE firm and then help augment their operating partner programs in specifically the area of commercial excellence. I mean, I'll do value creation as a generalist. I can handle finance issues and technology transformation and human capital and CEO onboarding. But my stock and trade is top line growth, both organic and through M&A. I've been doing this for approximately 4 years. Prior to that, I've been in professional services working in firms that sell to private equity, and I've done it for an accounting advisory firm nationally. I've done it for a large technology firm. I've done it for human capital. I've worked as an independent sponsor for a while, and prior to that, I was in industry selling capital equipment on a global basis to large users for purposes in semiconductor and printed circuit board. So really what I do is help companies go through that maturation stage to get to growth and really scalable enterprises rather than just a middle market business kind of working along and getting by.
So what was your original exposure to private equity? You know, at a certain point in your career, you sort of thought there was an opportunity and to leverage your career knowledge and history and context and experience and apply it into these companies. So what was the spark of that thought and how did you go pursue it?
I was living in a market where PE is not really big. I was living in upstate New York at the time, working in a middle market company that was growing, trying to figure itself out for, a transaction before I really understood what that even meant. So as I started networking, thinking about my next stage, I reconnected with a lot of friends of mine from the New York metropolitan area where I'm originally from. And I was really surprised by the number of networking events where you got all of the ecosystem of funders and limited partners and general partners and people doing deals. And I went to a few events and I was really taken by the reaction to me because I wasn't one of them. And as I started to get to meet some of the people, I'm like, I don't understand why you view me this way. Like, what is it about me? And then I started to figure out, like, this is a highly fragmented industry. It has specialists, it has subject matter experts. And there's a food chain here that if you understand and have trust with people, which I understood as a sales leader, there could be something interesting here because I really have always worked in middle market companies with only a few exceptions across my career. It's more interesting. You can get your hands around it. You could see outputs and changes. It's just nice working in companies with a couple hundred people with a few initiatives. So I just saw all those pieces lining up that aligned with my experience. Now I had to go meet people, learn to speak the language, and see how I could provide a level of value to them. So it's been a great journey for the last 15 years.
And so across that 15 years, how many engagements have you had as an operating partner?
Between 1 and 2 dozen. Most of my engagements go across much longer periods of time. So I gave a bit of the start of my story. So if I take a look at the last 4 years of my engagements, and I use 4 because of COVID, my phone started to really hum during COVID because a lot of my friends in private equity who I served in the different companies I worked for, hey, how you doing? What are you doing at home? Hey, we bought some companies. that we're getting ready for sale, and that could be complicated during COVID, and all of our operating partners can't get around. Could you help us in a few areas? And over the last 4 years, a lot of those engagements have been much longer than they were anticipated. It would start off as a conversation of, hey, could you kind of review the performance of the last 4 years, look at our compensation, couple month project, 10, 15 hours a week, and tell us what you think we're going to walk into. And we're going to marry your ideas with the sell side Q of E we're going to do. And funny enough, these all turned into like 6, 12-month plus projects because ultimately you pull the string in commercial excellence, which is my background. Inevitably, you get into tech and data. Inevitably, you get into reporting. Inevitably, you get into the dynamics of the executive leadership team. You inevitably start touching compensation, marketing. And when firms are trying to figure out what an exit looks like, or on the other side, just as they acquire, there's a lot of things that are unknown that need to be really thoughtfully considered and even more importantly, prioritized because the PE firms are trying to give the executive teams minimal goals and outcomes in year one, especially to see how they react to being in this kind of ownership environment. So the help I was giving was kind of as an interpreter in between the PE firm and the executive team, which I found kind of interesting.
So when you think about this label of commercial excellence, in our shop, we worked with almost 40 portfolio companies and lots of operating partners who come with a varied set of experiences. A lot of times they come from the sector where the portfolio company operates. They had their own business or they were the leader in a bigger company and they're now bringing that down into it. But how would you characterize the role of somebody who's an operating partner whose portfolio is commercial excellence versus finance or industry knowledge or other, I'll call it, slices of why they are the operating partner? How does that correlate to many other stories and situations that you and I have both heard of?
I think a lot has changed. Let me kind of go back a little bit in time. I mean, operating partners kind of came into the forefront of PE for the biggest firms, the Blackstones and the Carlyles. And it was a way in which there was a buffer of people who had experience, who could be board sitters, and they were great to bring to the limited partner meetings. And in totality, these men and women with these great executive backgrounds had great Rolodexes. So maybe there was opportunities for other deals. So I think the operating partner in the very early stages, what I call 1.0, going back like 20, 30 years ago, there was a variety of roles, but they were not necessarily correlated to, hey, you're going to go help a company grow its top and bottom line. I think over time, and I'll say the last 15 years, you start to see different people because operating partner models now are just not for the largest firms. The smaller firms, in many ways, have greater need for it because there is less margin for error when you only have a $500 million fund versus when you have a $15 billion fund. You can have a few losses, you can have a few bad deals. For the smaller PE firms, you're always thinking about the next fund, so you cannot have a bad outcome. I think in many ways, the middle and smaller PE firms started to slice and dice it. I think they took some cues from the big firms. From generalists, you started to get the finance operating partner first. They need really massive financial transformation, even big portcos. And typically, they want the CFO who's been in a fast paced environment. They've gone through transformation, they've gone through bank relationships and debt covenant issues, and they could speak PE and investment banking speak. So that CFO operating partner became very valuable. Most of them were ex operators themselves as CFOs. Then you started to see the technology one because technology is going in so many directions now. How do you change a CRM system? How do you change a ERP system? How do you think about digital now? So then you started to see a domain expertise there. And then other firms started to say, well, we're going to put value on human capital and getting the right people in and having a talent pipeline. Other firms got deeper from digital transformation to digital marketing. Top line growth has always been a challenge, I think, for most PE firms if they're buying, say, non SaaS businesses, because growth is slower. You need salespeople who really understand their industry, leaders who can lead teams and build teams. How do you leverage CRM systems and data? And how do you report out to your peers, to the PE firm, and ultimately the board? And this is an area that I've seen really grow in the last 5 to 7 years. You see organic growth, but typically the growth in commercial operating partner, depending on the operating partner model at the fund. You also may get M&A integration and M&A of add-ons into it. But it's really, how do you think about growth? How do you strategize and take the necessary steps to get the growth numbers that you're under tremendous pressure for?
So when you think about how most PE leadership, when they start the journey with their portfolio company, prioritize initiatives, where does investing in and prioritizing and pursuing anything related to sales and marketing, which is a top line driven, but also if they're going to be going on M&A binge, they're going to buy 6, 8, 10 companies, they're going to start to integrate all this stuff into some cohesive whole that sort of falls under the brand sales and marketing umbrella. What is the state of the art in leadership and your perspective on the gap between what they do and what they should be doing?
It's an area that's overlooked. I mean, if you've looked at any SIMs or deals that are being shot by investment banks, it's very, very thin on how they build up the revenue. Like, they'll build a revenue bridge on one of the slides, but actually the guts about how long have they been a client? How profitable have they been as a client? What is their lifetime value? Are they attracting the clients they want because they know their ideal client profile? These are things you and I talk about as in our vernacular and in our DNA. But typically PE firms, after they do a deal, and they do a deal based on it looks like an industry ripe for consolidation, or it's fragmented and we can get our piece and we think we have good leaders. It's generally at the first board meeting when they see the first deck that they realize that they don't have a brand, they don't have brand equity, they don't have a really strong, cohesive go to market, and they really haven't even identified what's holding them back. It's always been said, the PE firms really need a good CEO or a good CFO. It's becoming now, you need a good CRO, Chief Revenue, Chief Commercial Officer, and you need a good Chief Marketing Officer, CMO. The first hump they have to get after is that those are two different people. They serve two different functions. It takes a little while for that to sink in. I think sales is very misunderstood. It's always looked at, who do I play golf with? Who do I backslap with? Who likes me? And there is a lot of that psychology there. However, the longer you do this, you realize that commercial transformation is a math equation. That is all it is. You have to know what you're solving for. You have to have the data behind what you're solving for. Is it net new logo? Is it lifetime client value? Your data will tell you. You may not like what it tells you, but it'll give you the start. And I think that helps you figure out who are the hunters in your firm, who are doing the net new logo, who are the people who are more your gatherers. A lot of times I think people want to just start firing people in sales and commercial, but really it's more, maybe you have the right person but in the wrong seat. You really want to get through that first. You want to figure out the compensation and incentives. You want to figure out the measures. Then what starts to happen if they go down that line, and the PE firm is very interested to make that happen and happen as quickly as possible, they may have a patience issue because organic growth is tough. But what starts to happen if they start to get it right and the board decks get better and they're hitting their quarterly number is they butt up against, like, what is the resistance to going even higher? And generally it's top of funnel. They don't know if they're reaching qualified ideal clients. They don't know how to curate their experience. They don't know how they're to be messaged. People maybe can't say in a word across the sales organization, like, what do you guys sell? What do you girls sell? How do you do it? Why you? Once they start to get to that level, and they really need to be doing this by year one, is you have to figure out where the gap is. Is it that the industry doesn't understand you? Or is it that your brand is so fractured that it needs a bit of work? Now, the unfortunate thing in what you do, and I think you do great work, Scott, is that a lot of people in the private equity world will think of commercial transformation as the same as marketing, which it isn't. The one thing that they are starting to get their hands around is the concept of top of funnel marketing, leads, qualified leads, cost per lead, lifetime client value. Is this efficient? And I think that is the first place that PE and their portfolio companies start to think about commercial in one hand, and now they start to see what is the issue on the marketing side. It takes a journey, and it really takes a combination of having the right people at the portfolio company who really will say, I don't know how to do this. And it takes the PE firm to say, this is a priority because we just can't grow by continued acquisition alone, because then all you're doing is You're taking a problem and you're multiplying it by adding someone else's problems. You need a scalable business model, not a bunch of enterprises with top line.
One of the things that we are confronted with in our work for portfolio companies consistently is this dynamic around building a portfolio company that has or doesn't have a brand. And if it does, is it just in effect a band-aid, like a holding company brand that really only faces potential investors and maybe the next seller who's going to join the merry band? But the belief is, well, if I say to the seller, the eighth seller out of 12, sir, in 6 months, we're going to sunset your brand and transition it to the house brand, you're going to get a lot of pushback because people don't want to hear, this was my life's work and you tell me my baby's ugly. Now, our response to that is that it's always, nothing's black and white. There are shades of gray, and there's something called time. Because when someone sells to the PE firm or the holding company for the first year, they're freaked out about it because all of a sudden somebody owns their baby and they're not in charge of their baby. They have a voice, but it's like they're a bunch of voices now. But a year into it, when the integrations happen and people calm down and they get comfortable with the brave new world, then it becomes, we want to do whatever we can to make the greatest exit, because that's what private equity is all about, the greatest exit. One of the levers that are potentially on the table, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes it could be you have a game plan to transition brands towards some kind of centralized whole. Because on the surface, when you go to sell, if you have one brand and one story and one thing to value on a balance sheet, most PE folks would say it's going to be easier and faster and probably for more money to sell one brand versus nine or something like that. But we hear constantly, well, if I say that to the sellers, they're not going to sell to us because they don't want that. And so you get this, well, we're going to placate them and just use a holding company strategy and we get other fish to fry to create value. Again, not wrong, but it may not be the only answer. And so that whole idea of who are we? Why were we created? How are we the best in class? And how can we sprinkle some of that, pixie dust across all the enterprises we bought on a local level and maybe have our cake and eat it too for a couple of years? That's not off the table. You can say John Bova Inc. in Stamford, Connecticut, that sells these services is now part of Holdco X. Great. Continue to be John Bova Inc. But 18 months from now, when we've kind of figured out what's the secret sauce of the combined entity and how we're best in class in training and technology and all kinds of market benefits, you start to apply them in the local level and you build up that local brand. Great. And the commercial success, and you're selling something different and better and more enhanced. And then 18 months from now, maybe you go through 6 months, you start to think about sunsetting that brand. There's all kinds of flavors of vanilla out there that a lot of the private equity folks that we talk to are just starting to warm up to. And it's not an either or, it can be a both.
A lot of things can be gray as you're doing it. And one thing that's been happening is over the last 4 years in the marketplace, partially COVID, partially multiples, at the macro level, a lot of add-ons have happened. They're easier to get. They may be pricier than they hope, but that's how they're growing as they were trying to figure out what is the level of digitalization we're going to have in a more complex technical world. So you have a lot of firms that have a lot of add-on acquisitions. And as I'm doing assessments for work I'll take as an independent operating partner or running scrums on commercial excellence in transformation, the first question that happens as these acquisitions happen is, how do you cross-sell all this? Because you want to get the revenue. That's what the PE firms start with. From a reporting perspective, that part of integration is actually a little bit of the easier part. You have portfolio, platform A, you have add-ons 1 and 2, you have their top line, you have their cost of sales, you have their sales teams, you have their comp teams. It's easy to see it at a macro level. When you start getting into the guts of the clients, the top quadrant clients, you start to get into what are the top services and products they buy. You then start to see things that they're not really that integrated. They all look like partnerships more than one company. So usually what I have seen is that the concept of cross-selling the different brands and services is really desired. And that really spurs the conversation of, we did this deal, we kind of said we'd keep the brands, but we really can't in the name of growing the way we think we are going to grow. A lot of deals get done because they're placating sellers to say, look, your brand is going to live till the end of time. You have to live in a little bit of reality too. And if that's what it took to get the sale, the PE firm is going to run into a lot of problems, not only with brand and top line growth, you're going to run into problems with employee retention, your leadership. I think a lot of transparency all around on how a PE firm builds a platform, builds a larger valuable company, how you as the seller of the add-on are going to see an increased amount of your equity, making it worthwhile to say that early part of my life was my baby and my brand, and now I have a different brand that's more lucrative. So I think it takes a little bit of the PE firm leveling with the sellers as to what that looks like and why it's important. I very often see platforms with multiple brands, and you see a hodgepodge where they try to unify it under one, and all they did was slap a logo on literature and websites, and it comes off wrong. You have other cases where they just leave it all and they wonder why they cannot cross sell in a unified and efficient, effective manner with the right operating model. Then you have a combo of it where some of them have been integrated and some of them not. So I do think this is a big lever that is being left on the table in growth for sure.
There's an interesting way to think about this. Let's imagine you and I are working with Platform 12, and Platform 12 just bought Local Acquisition 4. And you and I could have a bourbon with the seller and say, look, here's the drill. Do you want 5 million more in your pocket? Yes or no? Well, nobody's going to say no. Then you go, great. There's a couple of ways in which the PE firm, the platform, can win your little piece of the exit is worth $5 million, the delta more or less. Don't you want 5 million more? Yes, I do. Okay, then maybe one of the things that we can do to increase the value of your share of the sale at exit is something called brand. If I could get you 5 million more and it's through brand, wouldn't you do it? Sure. Okay, well then maybe one of the things we have to do is within 18 months, John Bova Inc. has got to be retired. And I would like to think most people will say, I'll get over for 5 million more. And you go, okay, then that's a whole other conversation. Then you tell me my baby's ugly. I'm not saying your baby's ugly. I'm saying your baby needs to go away because we all want to get you $5 million more. And how am I going to do that? So our agency is in the midst of creating the first ever financial model to put a number on the value created through brand, strategies, investments, initiatives, and outcomes. So that when you go to exit, we can point to the iBankers and say, it's worth tens of millions more because of part of what the next guy is going to buy is a power brand and all that comes with it, and the commercial power and the reputational power and all these other dimensions. And it gives everybody a bunch of more money, of which that one person got 5 million out of it. We're trying to create the model to prove that out and to influence strategies and playbooks and capture the data. And at the end, everybody gets the money.
The way you're going about it makes sense because PE, they love numbers, they love spreadsheets. And if you can quantify it, I think it goes a long way. What's interesting when you come to an ACG event and you see all matter of solution providers and the whole value system and what are we all doing in our contribution here? Things like finance transformation becomes very easy for them to figure out. We need a new CFO. We need a new auditor. We want to go on Tableau. We want to go on a different FP&A software because we see through this greater efficiency and financial effectiveness drives cash. Technology transformation became a necessary evil. Now, a lot of PE firms have invested people and valued relationships around ERP and CRM systems, and they try to push it down to their portfolio companies. And they have certain playbooks around that to make the pain a little less, because that is a painful one. However, there's outcomes that can be quantified. So I think it makes everyone a little easier. Marketing, maybe more than commercials, a little harder because they always see marketing purely through the lens of lead generation. If you can increase our lead generation and then our consultants or people on commercial can raise their close rates, boom, you got top line growth. It's not that simple. Lead gen and top of funnel is a major problem. Depending on your product or service, what model your business is, you may not have the most qualified or experienced salespeople. The model may require you to use younger people. Consequently, the need for advertising and online is much higher. You're going to be burning through many more leads. And, I think To show a PE firm and a portfolio company first, you're spending this much money for lead gen. You have inexperienced salespeople trying to convert and curate an experience. Your close rates aren't getting any better. Your cost for a client's only going up. And the way you're modeling your growth, you'd have to spend an inordinate amount through the marketing and lead gen function when there are other parts of the whole pillars in the system of a strong brand and marketing. It needs to be chunked down. And I've always done it through you can overspend and fail, or you can slow it down and progressively spend on it. But it's something that they're going to make the investment in, either with a third party like yourself or a combination of our own internal CMO that's heavily supported with a brand agency and consultancy like your own. And I think it comes when they just don't see the growth numbers. They may go through the whole thing of like, let's fire everyone in sales, but I don't think they do that because they know how disruptive that is to a business. They just want to try to pull a couple levers. And I think if the right executives and the right commercial people just come up and say, look, we need money to refresh a brand, integrate, change the client experience, that will drive our top of funnel and things will get better.
We in the agency say the two pillar benefits of a strong brand are the following. Number one, you get to raise your prices and not lose clients. We all line up for $5 Starbucks coffee, and whether or not you think that Starbucks is the best coffee in the world is not the point. The point is they sell a lot of $5 coffee. And number two, you get to say to any customer, what else can I sell you? Because if we have a relationship and we have trust and we have a set of standards, then under that broad umbrella called brand, Starbucks can sell sandwiches and nuts and bags and all this other stuff. Well, the same principle applies to any company that has any strong brand. Well, in the world of middle market, I'll call it B2B private equity, why would that be off the table? There can be best practices, there can be service delivery models, there can be new features or new products that can be either sourced from the companies that have been acquired or even from the outside and then applied into this holding company in any service sector or any set of products. That then influences the brand. A brand is not just a coat of paint or lipstick. It is, who the hell are you? What are you going to do for me? And why should I say yes to you? And the moment you get to that point, then you can start to raise your prices and you can sell more stuff. Let's now apply that across a private equity portfolio company, whether it's a roll-up or any other kind of model. It's just branding foundational principles. This brand is brand.
This is where private equity is starting to see that symbiotic relationship that if you get your marketing house in order, you can do more things on the commercial side. You'll have more levers at your disposal. And if you're asking the right questions on commercial, it's inevitably going to end you up in a marketing riddle to solve. The two things you mentioned are two really strong levers to pull for commercial growth. Number one, raise your price. Firms are really bad at doing it. They don't want to scare their customer. They really don't know if the clients will bear it. And firms leave tremendous amounts on the table. You have to look at your clients. If you have pricing power, use it. They understand it. I mean, if you haven't raised prices through the inflationary period of the last 2 years, you've really left a lot on the table. PE firms that know how to pull levers always have a go-to pricing firm. It's massively important. Cross sell, what else can you sell them? It's always cheaper to sell to somebody you've already sold to. Your cost for each sale is only going to go down. So I completely agree with you that brand gives you at least those two things.
There's another aspect to what we're talking about that I don't want to leave unstated. The kinds of sectors and the scale of companies that private equity invests in, especially in the lower middle market, are sectors where marketing and brand and selling is not exactly world class. They're very successful for a whole lot of reasons, relationships and quality of service, but it's not exactly the blitzkrieg of marketing and sales and brand. And so part of the opportunity is to be below the market up because you invest in, or the far and away the best in, a local market or regional market for these industrial services. And the moment you start a conversation about why you should do business with us, they've already been pre-qualified as blowing away the world with how you present yourself and tell that story. You'd be crazy to turn that down. That's an unspoken piece of the immediate benefit of the work that we do.
Another thing we talked about in prior calls, which is to what extent do they want to push that on to the portfolio company? How is this firm selected over that firm? To what degree does the PE firm and their operating partners want to be at best visible and at worst intrusive? It's all very nuanced. And I think PE firms that start off with transparency on why they're doing business together have a great advantage. I think when they see that you have people who can run a good business but don't understand scalable enterprises, there has to be an understanding and agreement that there has to be trust that if the PE firm or the operating partners come in with ideas and contacts like you and I to come in and try to figure out some riddles, it shouldn't be met with resistance. And in fact, it should be encouraged because, to your point, you want these operators to be running really strong organizations because that's what they do well, and they convert clients in a model that has worked for them. However, at scale, it doesn't work, so they got to do that one next as well.
Okay, so we're going to start the wrap-up phase of the podcast. We always like to end on some fun stuff, personal anecdotes about John, you and your family, and do you have kids, like to go on vacation, who are your favorite sports teams, things like that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned to you, I'm a son of New York City, grew up just north of there, so I didn't go very far. I live in Connecticut, live a bit more of a rural life. I'm waiting for snow. I'm a skier. So the wintertime, wife of 22 years, daughter who's 17 years old, we tend to head north to Vermont because it's the closest good skiing. And it helps break up the work, it helps you to really free up your head. So those kind of activities like being in the yard, being on skis, so you can come back rejuvenated because the work we do is some really serious work.
Well, sir, this has been such
Thank
a treat.
you.
I really appreciate your time and your dialogue and your thoughts, and great stuff to chat about.
From all of us at MonogramGroup, thanks for tuning in to Beer Stories for Private Equity,
Episode 16.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and you'll be notified as we release new episodes. Please check out the show notes in the description from today's episode. Our email is podcast@monogramgroup.com. Feel free to email us with any comments or questions, and we'll try to answer them in our next episode.